So it occurs to you, you're unhappy. You're unhappy because you lack choice and freedom. You're unhappy because you recognize that lack of choice and freedom. And because you recognize that it's hard to find joy in many things in the world. You see the situations that you're in, and you understand how generally unfair they are, and you don't want to become susceptible to thinking that the unfairness is just the way that things are. Because if you accept that that's just the way that, if you just accept that that is the way that things are, then you become numb to it. As you begin to understand that the world is broken, you're part of a broken world, and that's just the way that things are. And so you avoid that inclination to accept that. You push back on the notion that this is just simply the way that things are, and you strive for something better. You recognize that your lack of freedom and choice is because the way that we have designed our societies is not to benefit the average person in their survival and their ability to be themselves to the truest form of themselves. The way our societies are built is to coagulate and coalesce much of the power and much of the means of production and much of the means of survival in the hands of those who own the means of production, who have immense amounts of power already, have immense amounts of wealth already. And because of that, you recognize that when you go to the grocery store, your options are limited. When you need to find work to survive, your options are limited. If you wanted to work for somebody, or if you wanted to work for yourself, you recognize that at the end of the day, there are very few and far and in between as far as options that do not corrupt your own personal code of not supporting these and those who have much of the power. And so you realize this, and that adds to your frustration. I can't get out from under the boot of those who would seek to limit my freedoms, who would seek to oppress me, without essentially working for those exact people who would want to oppress me. Without going into it on my own and striving out on my lonesome with my own endeavor, of which I would have to compete with every other single person in this world to be successful in that realm, to establish myself and grow as an individual, would be the only way of which to find success without being under somebody else who would seek to limit my freedoms. But I'm not a business person. You say to yourself, I'm not a business person. I don't have business acumen. Not to mention, if I were a business person, would I not be committing many of the same sins as those that I'm trying to avoid working under? If I become a business person, does that not mean that I'm relying on many of the tactics that those I refuse to work under employ on me, of which I would just be employing them on others? Manipulation. At the end of the day, in order to convince somebody to buy a product, or just to get, your product to be seen over somebody else's who already has much of the market share. In order to get your foot in the door, you're ultimately going to have to commit many of the things that you abhor, as far as having to market yourself, having to essentially commit many of these atrocities against people's attention spans in order to facilitate ultimately having enough support to be able to survive yourself. It's frustrating. It's frustrating you that you would have to stoop to the same lows to ultimately be able to survive in this world. That even at the end of the day, you are not free to be yourself, run your business the way that you want to run it. Hell, you're not even free to not run a business and just simply survive. You have to have a means of which to support an income. You have to provide a product to somebody of which they will pay you, and pay you relentlessly and consistently, so that way you can survive for the foreseeable future. And so there's just this constant drive that no matter what you do, whether it be working for somebody else or striving out on your own, there is always this constant anxiety that it won't be enough, that there will always be something you're having to do, that there will always be something that you have to commit to that you ultimately don't fully agree with, or you have to compromise on your own moral structure of which to simply survive. And that frustrates you. But then you imagine, what if there was a world? What if there was a world in which there wasn't a means to an end? You were simply allowed to survive by having been born and your life having value, that you are allowed to survive. You are allowed to be yourself. And you are allowed to find joy and happiness without essentially being forced through labor to get there. It's not necessarily to say that labor is inherently bad, and you realize that, but that if we truly value our own life and we truly value the lives of others, that we should not be gating ours as well as others' ability to survive at a basic level. That all life is valuable, all life is precious, and that our systems, our world, should facilitate all of life's ability to survive. And so you imagine a world in which there is no currency. There is no trade to speak of. There is simply giving. It's a world in which many of the things that exist now still exist, but you are not forced to take paths of which you despise, despite your best judgment. All of your paths are open to you based on what you want to do. And you, as well as others, can strive to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish uninhibited, meaning that most everybody in this world becomes an expert in their field because they are uninhibited without barrier to ultimately reach their ultimate desire of becoming whomever it is that they want to be, within obvious reason. And you recognize that one of the steps to get to that world is without money, is without currency. Because currency corrupts our ability to see each other as valuable. Our value is now a number. It can be broken down simply, and our value is not inherent to us existing. Money takes the value away from our lives instead of understanding that our lives are inherently valuable and we are deserving of that life to do with it as we please. And so you strive for a world of which money is not the means to the end. Trade is not the means to the end. Commerce is not the means to the end. Consumerism is not the means to the end. You understand that because of the way the world is so focused around currency and money and trade, that much of the energy that is put towards facilitating this broken system that doesn't find inherent value on our own lives, that if we just relinquished all of those processes and put that energy and put that time back into people's inherent survival, that our world would be much healthier, much happier, and much more fruitful for all people. If we didn't have to think about how we were going to afford something, and instead simply how can we make it happen? Who do we need to ask for the resources so that way we can facilitate this goal? It's not to say that that world would be perfect, but it's not to say that it wouldn't certainly be better. To find a way of which everyone can get what they want within reason and in a way that's fair, but ultimately at the end of the day treats every person as if they are inherently valuable, despite their labor. And then you think to yourself, what do you think is it going to take? What is it that I need to do? What is it that we need to accomplish to move on to that world? To move beyond where we are now, onto a world in which people have inherent value, where life has inherent value. And you recognize you have to change people's minds. You have to talk to them. You have to communicate. And so you talk. And you share your ideas. And you communicate. And you discuss, where the follies of a system like that may be. and you try some things and you come to some conclusions. You see where things may not work perfectly and you edit those things so that that way they can work better. But ultimately, with the goal to be that all life is inherently valuable. Not, how are we going to afford this? And you do that, and in doing so, it equalizes people. In a world such as that, all of the power of those who have much of the wealth in the world currently would be stripped. And they would become as if they are equal to that of anybody else. You remove the profit motivation, and all motivation is now focused on how can this be utilized of which to help people? How can we make this process better in which it can ultimately help people or make people's lives easier? And all of those who are greedy and all of those who had and all of those people who would surmise that they deserved all that power and that it's being taken away would suddenly be on the same foot as all of those who did not and all of those who do not have. And you imagine that world and you go, doesn't that just sound so much better? Doesn't that just feel so much better to imagine a world in which nobody has an upper hand on anybody else? Everybody has to collaborate and everybody has to work together in which to accomplish their goals, the things that they want to accomplish, the things they want to do. And again, in many of those circumstances, these people are much happier because they're uninhibited in their ability to be themselves and strive for their ultimate goals, their ultimate desires. Does that not sound like a better world to you? I hope so.